All right, good afternoon. I apologize about the delay. Got caught in traffic and then fire truck and ambulance and everything, yeah. Welcome to the Building and Grounds Planning and Development Committee meeting, Tuesday, September 10th. Want to welcome Mr. Bass, who is our newest member to the committee and also to the board, so want to welcome him here. Looks like we have a full committee here. So go ahead and get started with agenda item number 1, Benton Middle School, use of facilities. Mr. Norwood.
Thank you, sir. We just received this request for use of the gym at Benton Middle School on the south side for River Park Church. It's a startup, and they're asking to use the gym and 3 classrooms on Sunday mornings for a minimum of 1 year. Dr. Machin has confirmed he recommends this use, so it'll be subject to the usual fee structure on the facility usage agreement and board policy for use of facilities for insurance and everything.
I have a question. Yes or no, have they already started meeting there before they brought this to the committee? Okay, thank you. Any questions or anybody have anything for Mr. Norwood? Anyone want to entertain a motion?
I'll make the motion. This is an accepted use that we've done in the past, so I'll make the motion to approve.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Okay, have a motion by Mr. Bullard, second by Mr. Bass. If the committee would please vote. Are we? I think we're going hands. I don't think we're ready. So, all in favor? Thank you. Motion passes. All right. Agenda item number 2, CM 1501, Benton Middle, secure entrance. This is a new request for discussion. I believe is Lieutenant Johnson here, or Mr. Norwood, you gonna handle this?
I did ask Lieutenant Johnson to come and give specifics. I can give just a little background that we've been doing these over the years as a matter of priority, starting with some of the elementary schools, and this is one of the last schools that hasn't had a secure entrance put in. We just finished Cope Middle.
Okay. Mr. Johnson? Lieutenant Johnson?
Good evening, Board. Benton Middle School, 8th grade side, or however we want to refer to it, Benton Middle South, Old Benton High School, however you want to refer to it. The entrance to that location is not a secure location like we would like to see. I would say that. There is some structure that is already present there, and I've been in constant conversation with Mr. Roger when we started kind of thinking about this location, and Dr. Machin regarding this. There's also some fencing around the other areas where there are some access points on the outside, exterior, basically the south side of that complex, that we've kind of threw some ideas out there about some fencing and some, you know, of course, up to fire code and everything with crash bars on the interior going outward. So in my personal opinion, I think we need to, you know, we need to get this thing kind of shored up a little bit with some issues that are going on. It kind of keeps a spot where whenever we have our visitors that enter our campuses in these locations, as you've seen, we don't really want them to have full access and reign to everything. We want them to go to basically a checkpoint and then be directed or allowed other places in those areas. So I'll take any questions at this time.
Mr. Norwood, can you give us some details on what we would be looking at, please?
Well, if you mean cost.
No, structure, like where are we building, what are we building?
What are we looking at here?
Yeah.
I think is that what you're...
Yeah, I want to know, like, what are, I don't...
Okay, so actually, I put this is a floor plan of the entrance and the administrative area. It's to the left there, and the front counter is on the left, and then the right-hand side is classrooms.
You
Actually,
have a mouse you can move over there so we can follow along?
So, I have a map of the entire wing, but what I'd like to do is ask Mr. Roger or Chief Johnson to give an overview, because they're the ones that have been out and run some, not estimates, but actually scope of work on what would be required.
Mr. Bullard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still a little bit at a loss. Does this reflect the proposed changes? Or
No, sir,
this
this is-
looks like just
This-
what the existing situation.
That's correct, yeah. This is a new request, and we haven't been given any direction to do anything yet, so I pulled the floor plan for the school, and Chief Johnson and Stacy Roget have looked at it. They feel that the scope of work would be well below any contract limit. It would not require the type of contracts and bidding that would normally be done through my office. It could be done through the maintenance department. It could be done with bond funds that are available for Benton Middle School, but it's a fairly small scope of work. So we wanted to get your direction first before we started taking any action. But we're talking basically about a secure entrance with a secure electronically operated door like you see at many of our new schools, and then some fencing to connect some of the entries around the south side, which is the newer part of the old high school.
Would it be appropriate to incorporate this into the proposed changes that would be funded by the bond funds that have been designated for Benton Middle School?
Yes, sir, I think it would
Conversion
be.
of the
Yes,
high
sir.
school?
Mr.
I was
Roget, you have
really
something?
expecting that.
Let's go ahead and hear what Mr. Roget has to say. Thank you, Lieutenant Johnson, thank you.
Well, I was just gonna ask for details on what we were looking at doing today. We met with the fire marshal to preliminary look at our egresses and what we were wanting to do. And we're gonna just add let's see if I can get to work. We're gonna add a storefront across there where that red dot's moving. And we're gonna rebuild this storefront to where we have secure come in and be allowed out. So we're gonna work on those prices and get those back to you, but that is the gist of what the project is.
So basically,
It's a Cope Middle School.
like a glass barricade with controlled access?
Yes, sir, with
And then
controlled access.
we're gonna give them egress out another direction?
Same direction, we're just gonna have egress out.
Yeah.
Sir? Yes, like Platt, like the new Cope design
So-
that's done.
I want to ask this question, and I got a feeling my two counterparts in South Bossier, this is burning on their minds also. It's been brought up numerous times before, Elm Grove is wide open.
So is Alton High School. So is
I mean,
Alton
we've
High
got a
School.
lot of schools like this. I'm just curious, is it because we're just now changing the dynamics of this school that this is coming up? I guess kind of,
There's still gonna be some open areas to this setup. It's not gonna be 100%. This is just to help a lot with the parenting in the design in the front entranceway, because of the changes that's happened to the school. A lot of parents don't know which entrance to go to the school, so we're gonna
Funnel them
redirect
in.
them, and also to secure just that front. Basically like Elm Grove Middle has inside the office. They're secured in that area. I understand not building the building, but we won't have 100% building the building with this design either.
Could I ask, how much money in the bond money have we set aside for this, for Benton Middle? Can you tell us that? How much money was set aside to make improvements?
Do you have that in your report, Mr. Babineau, or do I need to try to look that up?
The balance of the budget on Benton Middle is still $3.4 million.
3.4?
Yes, ma'am. And officially, the current project at Benton Middle is still a ring road. We reported that about 6 months ago, so, all right. And the board has paused on that. They've taken no action, just FYI. But the total budget was $3.4 million. All right.
so Mr. Roget, something like this is not, I mean, this is something the maintenance could do within a couple of weeks. This is not a biddable, something we have to bid.
It will take several months. We have to submit to the fire marshal officially, and then we're working right now on getting quotes. We met today and have a contract to get us some numbers on that. We'll go through the contracts with the,
So it's big enough to where we are gonna have to bid this out.
well, we're gonna quote it out, not bid it out.
Quote it
It's
out.
under the bid law. It's into the
Okay.
quote, Public Works quotes. Yes, sir.
I recently toured Cope Middle School too, the front entrance that they just put in, and looked at some figures there. I believe the one at Cope was about $71,000 to do that. So if that gives you guys some idea of, if it's the same scope of work, what it's looking at, and I think Mr. Roger may be able to look at with his team and maybe, you know, change the scope of the project, maybe able to do it for a little less. So that's what we're looking at. If you guys would just look that up.
Mr. Bamberg?
Adam, while we're on this subject, is there any other schools that really have a, I mean, I don't know if that's a good question to ask in a public meeting with all the crazy people out there, but are there any schools that have issues that you say we really need to address? Because I know we've done a look through the parish and at some point, but that you're just saying, hey,
As far as issues, no.
That's what I was-
That assessment, I mean, that thread is always,
well, here's what I'll say. If there is one, I'll just get with Mitch and them, and if it needs to be addressed to the board, I'll be in favor of that. I mean, or to get some work done. If there's a safety concern at any school, that we can.
we've been working on this for several, I mean, as this board knows, I mean, we've had several of these storefronts put in and these safe areas to come in to where it just provides a threshold and a holding spot to where you can visually lay eyes on them before they have access to everybody in that facility. So absolutely, we're working on that. Like I said, it all costs money. That's one of those things, and that's what we rely on you guys to do. And to answer your question, Mr. Newman, earlier about some of those schools, just the design of that particular school. Like, for instance, Green Acres Middle School is kind of the same type of setup. There are protocols that we had to put in place to try to implement over there to make it to where it's a lot safer with the exterior doors being locked and all that kind of stuff. Also, and there's some schools we've provided, you know, ringers to where, you know, they have to be actually teachers or some staff would have to come out and actually open that door in some of these wings. But that's just to answer your question on that.
I'll be
Mr.
the
Bass.
new guy and ask the new guy question. Each school, is there any, what's the greatest asset for, as far as safety goes at each one of these schools? Is there a common thread that goes through each one as far as what we're looking for, or how does that work?
Well, undeniably, the best asset that you guys have provided is the actual SROs and that post-certified deputy in that school every day. We have something that many parishes in the state don't even have. We have a law enforcement officer present with his marked unit out in front, his or her marked unit parked out in front of every school. That's a deterrent in itself. That's helpful. That's speed. That's all those things that we look for in things like this. So if you want to know what the number one asset is, it's that. This other stuff, yes, there's some things that we could probably tidy up on certain areas structurally that we can make it better. We can always be better. But, you know, that support of the board for those law enforcement officers being in the school, that's number one in my opinion. Yes, sir.
I guess Mr. Norwood and Mr. Roger, if y'all could, you know, this is for discussion only, so I guess if y'all could get us some information back as far as estimated cost, and then we can, as a committee, we can decide if we want to do it through the maintenance or try and push through your group versus allocating bond funds to that. We'll do that. So if you could, at the next B&G meeting, bring back some preliminary numbers on what we might be looking at here. Any other questions? Mr. Dean?
Could I also get you to include, like Elm Grove and Plain Dealing? I know those are older schools. I was at Plain Dealing the other day, and there must be 50 doors, or this is a barn here, but it would be no way I know to.
Yes, sir. I met with Miss Isabar the other day, and she and I discussed some things regarding that. And there's some things implemented that we have to do on exterior door lockages and all of that kind of stuff. So there's some stuff we can put in place there. Yes, there's some structural things that we could possibly do there. So it's all open. It's to y'all's wishes.
All right. We're good there, Mr. Norwood? You got?
That was Elm Grove Middle School, correct?
You know what? Let's just do this. Any school that doesn't have this and could benefit from this, bring that to us as well for informational purposes, and then specifically for Benton Middle School, if y'all could get us the preliminary information for what this particular project would be. But at the same, you know, aside from that specific project, also let us know similar things that we would need to do at any other schools that don't currently have it. if you know, if we have 4 schools that we need to do a similar project, maybe we need to allocate specific bond funds. Mr. Roger, you got something you'd like to add there?
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I want to remind you, we did have a security, not committee, I want to know the right term, meeting, and we discussed all of these and their cost and which direction to go.
Thank you for
We
that.
would be revisiting this again.
No, so thank you
So
for that
just
reminder.
Be
and,
clear.
Yeah, so Mr. Norwood, if you would get that information from that audit and security meeting and send it to the entire board, actually, not just the B&G committee, but if you would send that information from the audit and security meeting to the board where it contained the information Mr. Roger referenced. Okay, sound good? Yeah. Okay, everybody good with that? Good? All right. You got that?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, Mr. Cheatham.
I think when we get that information, I think we might be better served having an audit and security meeting and discussing this in executive session. That way we're not, I just think that might be a better option instead of bringing this particular item back through building and grounds, have an audit and security meeting, have an executive session where we can discuss openly, as board members, the options there.
You need to ask Will if we can do that. Okay, all right, so, Chairman, with that? We'll get with you on that. Okay. All right, moving on, item number 3, CM 1703C, plain dealing, entrance canopy. This is the new request and discussion. I guess, Mr. Norwood?
Yes, sir, I'm bringing up the information. A board member request was made, I believe, Mr. Newman, to add this to the agenda for discussion purposes. I spoke with Ms. Isabella this week, and specifically, the items that were identified was a canopy down the front, on the south end to the new bus drop-off, and then a canopy to the band room on the north end. So Mr. Roger has worked up some preliminary estimates for that, and I'm bringing that information up right now.
Okay, so if you could, go back to that picture and kind of go back to the other
Yes,
picture, document, whatever it was, and kind of show us with your mouse where we're talking about.
All right, this is plain dealing, K-12. And I'm gonna have to use my pointer, my mouse is acting up a little bit tonight, but, actually, you can't see that when it goes onto the
And we're good
page
enough,
there.
we can see that good enough.
You see that little dot?
Yes.
Okay. This is the entrance here. Where you see the cars parked is now a bus drop-off. The paving's been reformatted to swap the bus drop-off for the parking. And so this is now where the buses line up in the morning and afternoon. This is the main walk into the school here. And this is high school, this is elementary, gym, cafeteria, middle school, and preschool in the back. And so the canopy starts or stops right here, where it goes between the high school and the elementary. So this sidewalk from that T down to the street is not covered. The other location is here in the back of this wing, which we used to call the activities building, from the library or around the sides here on the library side of the ground level, going back to the band room across the street here on East Oak. So I'm gonna, now this is the aerial photograph, I have a diagram on, that's a site plan where that's highlighted in red with the estimates on it. So I'm gonna have to switch back and forth. All right, it's a little light, but this is on the front canopy or on the south end, it's 135 feet. And the estimate to do that would be $27,000.
What type of canopy is that?
Mr. Roger, you want to give a description of that?
That is verbal numbers for a lightweight aluminum extruded canopy.
Extruded.
Such as, trying to picture what school, but like we put, out of, not an architectural, something like Legacy or W.T. Lewis, just a standard flat ribbed, like the front of Kingston. Okay. in front of
Purlin and steel pipe purlin?
No steel, all aluminum. All aluminum, ridge panel over, standard duty, purlins.
Like the ones at Houghton?
Poles.
Not that primitive. These are,
Yeah, yeah, I
these
like
are
that word.
manufactured, not built.
Hear that?
Not,
Primitive, I like that.
poor choice of words, but,
I heard it.
They're similar to
I
the
think you meant
ones-
vintage.
vintage.
No,
Vintage.
he was right.
My apologies for that. A manufactured extruded aluminum awnings, and all those are rough estimate over the phone numbers that I don't know how exactly wide we're going to do it. I just Googled links, so those numbers are rough.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
What's the other section,
Yeah,
Mr.
what's the
Norwood?
section?
This is from the ground level by the library back to the band room on the north end.
What are the two different numbers?
That's two different sides of the street. The 250 feet will take you from the back of the library to the street, and then the 35 feet is from the street to the band building.
All right, couple questions real quick. How much do we have left out of the plain dealing project budget that we've been?
We don't have anything left in that budget. The last 38,000 was allocated for the asphalt overlay, and that was actually supplemented by funding from some other sites. There is a balance currently of about, I think, Mr. Babineau looked at that for me last month. It was around $9,000 that showed up. It just in settling the books.
Positive or negative balance?
Positive, yeah. And that's about what is listed under plain dealing at this time.
Okay. Mrs. Burt, do you have anything that you'd like to add about either one of these? One more necessary than the other, if either, or can I get your take on it since you're boots on the ground?
Yes, sir. The front one is really what we need more than anything else. That's where in the afternoon all our elementary school students come there. So to go to the band room, middle school, high school, you can give them an umbrella, they're fine. You can't really give umbrellas to a bunch of first graders trying to get on the bus. And parents don't really like their kids to be wet all day long, especially the little ones. So if you could help us with the front, that would be great.
So is this something that is a bond construction funds, or is this something that we can do just as B&G to say, get this done for them, or what are our options if we wanted to move forward with the front piece here?
I think your preferred option would be to designate bond funds and let us go look for where those funds could come from within the bond program. You have another option of designating some monies that have been received for sale of land or something like that. I don't know that you want to start that at this time, but that would be the other option.
So we need about another $20,000 approximately on top of the $9,000 surplus that you have identified. Is that
Yes, sir.
correct?
No, those are all just estimates, but that's the best estimate we have at this time.
Does anybody want to entertain a motion that we move forward as a committee to do this initial canopy across the front? Mr. Bakash, you have a question?
I have a question. If we hunt through the bond funds, now is that taken away from other schools? I mean, we're waiting to start construction on Houghton.
It just depends. At $20,000, I don't think it's really going to,
Bother?
I don't think it's going to delay any of those major projects, because of the minor amount. Does anybody have any take on that? Mr. Bullard?
I agree that $20,000 in the scope of, the overall scope of things is not gonna be a major factor in as far as future construction. But at the same time, I would caution that we acknowledge what we're doing here and that it is not going to set a precedent. I continue to be concerned about some of our funded but not started projects. I fear what the cost or the actual costs are going to be, and we've taken care of a lot of schools and a lot of needs, but we still have some that are outstanding, and once we address those, and this is a need, there's no question about it.
Yeah, it's
And
my opinion that this should have been done with the initial
It should have, yes, it should have.
remodeling.
That's the first thought came to my mind, is why didn't we do it when
We
we're
did a
doing
press
all the
box
other?
instead.
But, and I, we agree, it needs to be done. I would just caution, let's don't set a precedent here. Let's move cautiously, on similar situations until we get these major projects underway and we've got them locked in price-wise, because I fear I was dealing with a gentleman today, and these tariffs are tearing him up, and I've got to think they may impact some of our construction down the road. So that's all. Thank you, sir.
If we could have an action item, Mr. Norwood, for the next B&G, a second action item, for you to bring us back some additional information as far as options to find the additional funds. Okay?
Yes, sir.
That would be something. Mr. Roger, do you have, oh, yeah, let's look for some multiple options on that, if we could, Mr. Norwood, for that smaller amount of money, where we could maybe this, that, or the other on that. Mr. Cheatham?
Yeah, not very often, Mr. Bullard and I are on the same page, but on this, I'm concerned. I do believe this is a need, something probably should have already been done, but I also don't believe we need to keep, this week it's the canopy here. Next week, Eric Newman's gonna want a canopy to the baseball field at Parkway. Next week, it's gonna be, we're gonna keep bringing things up, and we already have projects that we've got money dedicated to. So, not that I would be for doing this if we add to the 9,000 left over, if we save some money somewhere along the way, which, again, I always look at, gentleman sitting out in the crowd and ask him to save us money on every project he's doing. But, again, I just don't think this is something that should jump the projects that we've already done, because if we do that next week, Dennis or Eric will be back with another project that's only $24,000, wanting us to approve it. I think we need to stick with the projects that we're gonna, my concern is we're not gonna have the money to finish the projects we have, even without adding little things here and there. So, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and that's right, and that's, we're challenging Mr. Norwood to bring us some funding options back. Don't bring me one, bring me more than one on
I
that.
have two so far.
Find 2 more.
Well, and normally, I would probably say, let's look at, maintenance, but we just cut their budget significantly to start this year. So I'd have a hard time looking at him and saying, hey, man, find this in your budget, when we smacked his budget around to start the school year. So that would normally, in years past, I think we would say, hey, Stacy, find a way to make this happen in your budget, but I don't feel comfortable asking him to do that as much as we cut his budget.
One,
So- Mr. Bullard?
just a follow-up comment. We need to keep in mind, we're 7 years into some of these estimates we've been working with. And Clarence has made some adjustments, but we're still working with 7-year-old data. And so, as Mr. Cheatham commented, we just got to be careful right now.
So Mr. Norwood's gonna bring us, and the good thing right now, this is just a discussion, and we're gonna have some additional information brought back to us for the next meeting. And I think here in a little while, when Mr. Babineau gives his updated presentation, we'll have a good understanding that might address, you know, some of these concerns. All right, so that's 2 action items, Mr. Norwood. Good so far? All right, agenda item number 4. Cope Middle School asphalt court overlay. This is a new request and/or action. Mr. Norwood?
Yes, sir. We received this request, as you know, within the last couple of days. I pulled an aerial photograph just to give you an idea of the dimensions at Cope of the outdoor basketball field. The court, excuse me. So this is the campus at Cope, and the basketball court in the back is about 120 feet long, and at the total square yards, which would be used for figuring the quantity of asphalt, is about 1185 square yards.
Excuse me, the area encompassed in green is what you're referring to?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm sorry, the other dimension is covered up by that, so I can't read it on this picture. Let's see if I can thumb through to the other one.
Mr. Downey, you had a comment?
Mr. Babineau, with the planned construction there at Cope, I was involved in a conversation, I don't know how long ago, several weeks ago, that area may be used as a staging area for equipment and materials.
I don't think, well, let's see. Your new wing is going to be right here. So the staging is going to be area immediately adjacent to, not over here. So I think you're safe with.
So that work on the band room wouldn't impact that area?
No. Yeah, the existing band room was right here. At one point, we looked at an option there, but everything's been moved to right over here. So that's not going to endanger what's going on over here.
Mr. Bass, would you like to, I think this was kind of something you came up with. You want to
Well,
elaborate on the need and where it came from?
Right, to speak to that, in conversations as far as the staging area, we heard that too, but I think they're gonna stage it on the other side. But the need arose from the fact that, in one gymnasium, they have 160 students that are participating in PE in one gymnasium. So there's nowhere, with the new lines that are coming, there are going to be an additional 100 to 120 students that are then coming to Cope to utilize that new wing that's being built. So you're going to compound 160 students doing PE in a gymnasium with no overflow area to take them. So this need arises from, there are several PE activities that can take place there. Now, on that basketball court, for lack of a better term, they've already tried to do some of that this year, but that slab is original to when the building was built in 1981. They've already had a loose gravel incident this year where a student has broken an arm on that. It's starting to give, and I think, you know, the 1.5-inch asphalt overlay from an expense standpoint is not going to be very pricey, and I think we may have identified some ways to do that. But those students would be able to utilize that much better from a PE standpoint instead of adding another 120 students to the school and no more room for that PE. So that's where that need arose from.
Mr. Norwood, can you give us some additional information on the collaboration with the police jury for this overlay?
No, sir. It's not a part of our cooperative endeavor that dealt with the athletic tracks at 2 high schools. What we have, though, is a potential balance of funds in our favor on that agreement. Right now, the estimate's about $26,000. I'm waiting on the final numbers from the police jury on what the cost of the Kingston Road improvements were, and then we'll have a confirmation of what that balance would be. And so I did go ahead and contact Bill Altimus and Butch Ford about this, just to let them know that the request had been made, but there's been no action taken.
If I can follow up on that, just in some conversations that I've had with the jury, that estimate, that number is looking somewhere between 12 to 14,000 to kind of give you a scope of what would be done on there. So there would still be a remaining balance on there, and that's the jury providing an 1.5-inch asphalt overlay to give some of that. So very minimal cost, and I feel like it would really help some of that that PE problem that we're talking about that's going to be compounded next year with those additional 100 to 120 students. So,
Mr. Norwood, that balance that would be coming back to our favor from the police jury, what is, if we do not utilize it for items like this, is that basically a cash on request type balance, or?
Well, it's currently our money. We're doing this on an invoice basis, and so if there is no work done, then that money would never leave our coffers. So it is currently in the bond fund, but it's been earmarked for this collaborative endeavor with the police jury. But if, for example, the 2 high school overlays came in for less, we would be billed for less, and that number would go up. But it is currently our funding. We just have it committed for the overall cooperative endeavor.
And for those of you that aren't too up to par on this, this is where we traded land and cash for police jury to do work for Kingston Road and some overlays and some other items like that that they are able to do at approximately 80% of normal cost. So that is why we entered into this cooperative endeavor a couple years back. Mr. Roger, do you have something you'd like to add?
Estimated cost outside the police jury came up to about $2 a square foot, approximately $25,000 to do that project. Just for reference.
To do this project?
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, saves between $10,000 and $12,000 doing it this way.
So, Mr. Norwood, when do we think we'll have an update from the police jury on any of this stuff for Kingston Road?
Well, I spoke to Butch Ford about that on Wednesday at the police jury meeting. I think they're very close to having their final numbers. It was the contract cost, and they have their final change orders executed, and then the cost of the job supervision, which they haven't been billed for yet, but the consultant was standing there, and he's aware that we're trying to close it out, so it'll be very soon.
So very soon as in before the next meeting, or very soon by the end of the year?
Yes. Yes, sir. I mean, there are certain things, as you know, that are beyond our control with other government entities, but but I'm sure they'll be eager to bill us because they'll want to pay out their contract.
Mr. Chairman, can I make would you entertain a motion at this time?
Yes.
I'll make a motion, we authorize the superintendent to act on our behalf to enter into a local services agreement with the police jury to execute documents and take action related to an asphalt overlay of that outdoor court at Colton Middle School, funded by the 2012 bond construction program.
Have a motion by Mr. Bullard,
Second.
second by Mr. Bass. I have a question by Mr. Bamberg before we vote.
What is the time frame on the overlays at the 2 tracks that they're doing now?
The latest report is that it being an election year, they're committed to finish their programmed asphalt overlays first. That have been a matter of record for a couple of years, but they're going to try to work us in as soon as possible, possibly during one of the breaks this fall. And I believe that they are reminded of that every time they see me at a meeting.
So fall break, maybe? I mean,
They haven't firmly committed to a date yet.
okay.
I think Mr. Backhouse had a question first, and then we'll go to Mr. Cheatham.
Do we know how long it would wait, how long we'd have to wait to get something positive on this instead of speculation?
Are you looking
No,
at
I'm
me?
looking at
Oh.
Mr. Norwood.
I ask them every time I see them, honestly, Mr. Backhouse.
I understand.
So, some of the work that they do with the asphalt overlays is weather related. Fortunately, they've had a break this year for a little while in the weather. You know, we've had a drier month or two, so they're catching up, and we haven't had any major flooding events, so they haven't had to do that sort of damage control. But there are a lot of factors that affect their schedules. But I can get an update before you at any time, though. So I can report that back at the next meeting as well, on what their current schedules are. And honestly, on a job as small as this one, they might be able to work it in if they're in the neighborhood, so to speak.
And by small, from my understanding, it would be 1 to 2 days to complete that project.
I do know that their overlay trucks right now are down in Sligo area around Old Oaks. I do know that they have a job down there that they're doing now with their overlay trucks. So those are gonna come first.
Mr. Cheatham?
And I'm just trying to make sure I understand the motion correctly. We're making a motion that we use bond money to do this, or that we use the cooperative endeavor leftover money?
I'll
It's
amend
the
it to
same.
include that notation,
Okay,
bond
well,
money and/or.
If I could just speak to that, I wrote the motion intentionally vague to give us the latitude to find the money and make it happen. If you start stipulating the details and something goes wrong, we've got to bring it back to you. But we do know, we believe we have the money available in the balance of the local services agreement. And as I said, that money wouldn't be spent if it's not needed. But there's also the option to advance it just by doing a separate agreement. Typically, when we've updated our local services agreement, they've redone the whole document anyway, as opposed to just a letter of amendment. But I would need to get with them and get their consent as well. So I really left that intentionally vague until we can iron out the details.
Yeah, and
But this motion is sufficient to give us the power to move forward, and that was the intention.
Yeah, and I just, I didn't want us to be shooting down even having a motion on a canopy, and then it sounded to me like we were getting ready to spend extra money the way that motion was read. But I would be for this if we're using the leftover money from the cooperative endeavor with the police jury. I went to Cope about a month ago. First of all, the secure entrance is nice, but that middle area is hot as unbelievable. I don't know how the kids even stay in there. That's another project we're gonna have to look at. But and I also walked on this area back here, so I know it's something that needs to be done. But I just wanted to clarify that it was gonna be not money out of the bond fund of the projects we have left, but money out of the cooperative endeavor.
If you want to stipulate that specifically, you could.
Okay. Just to clear this up in my brain, you're saying that we're gonna have money left over after we do the tracks, right? We're doing 2 tracks. We're gonna have some money left over, 10 to 12,000, is that correct?
This started with the Kingston Road improvements.
Right.
That we had to do for Kingston Elementary and the new Benton High School is where this started from. We also included the 2 tracks. One was
Right.
Bossier that we committed to the city to do in exchange for them transferring the money. And then also we added in
Right.
the other track that was in disrepair in the parish.
Right, I got all that, I understand all of that, I know where that money's going, but now we're saying there could be 10 to 12,000 left over after we do those
That
projects.
is correct.
Correct?
According to what we budgeted to what
Okay,
is being,
so does that money have to be used with the police jury to do a project, is what I guess I'm asking? Because I guess in my head, I'm thinking, if we've got $10,000 to $12,000 left over from that, why can't we take that and put it on the canopy? I'm just thinking this canopy is important. So that's just what my thinking is.
I think Mr. Norwood can speak to that.
So, first of all, the money that we're talking about is contingency money that was built into the agreement. And we've already had $50,000 in change orders that spent up most of that money. That was its purpose. It was earmarked for asphalt and improvements by the police jury. I don't think the police jury does canopies, but we know they do asphalt. Okay, so the idea was, well, they're doing asphalt for us. We have a balance of funds, so we could do a little more asphalt. The thinking was just that simple. The subject of other projects at other schools didn't come into it. We're just identifying a potential funding source based on the need that was brought to us. So the canopy couldn't be done through the local services agreement. But if you choose not to do, the court, the money will remain where it is now, which is at Plain Dealing, Bossier High, and Benton High is where the money's coming from.
And to
The way
speak,
the way the endeavor was set up.
Oh, okay.
and to speak to that real quick, there's already been $43,000 spent at Plain Dealing for paving projects that have already been completed on this cooperative endeavor. So Plain Dealing's already benefited from this cooperative endeavor
I'm
program.
not saying we shouldn't do this project, I'm just trying to get my head.
Just not money.
I understand that now. I didn't know it had to be go to those, I didn't know it had to go to those.
Well, it's as I said,
I got it.
yeah, it doesn't get utilized unless it's needed, but that is one source of funding for this asphalt, and it would be a savings because they could do it for less.
I got it.
Mr. Bamberg?
When will we, I mean, I know the projects may not be done until fall, but when will we know what the cost of the projects are with the jury on these particular projects that are already?
We have the final cost on the Benton project proper. The two projects were the turn lanes and the signalization. What we don't have yet, and we should have soon, is the cost of just the project oversight, the inspection that was done by Beast Engineering. We don't have that number yet. We haven't been invoiced yet. When we receive that invoice, that will be it.
That means, that tells us how much money that we have, but I'm talking about how much are we gonna spend on the two tracks?
The two tracks, we won't know until they do the work, and then they'll invoice us for that work. We think we're well covered, because the price that we estimated for Plain Dealing, was more than enough to cover the actual cost of Plain Dealing. But they're just estimates at this point.
I think Mr. Bamberg was
Well, what I
wanting to
wanna
make sure
do
that
is,
the
what I wanna
tracks
do is
don't
do
run
the
out of
tracks
money.
and all, we move to this project first, and all of a sudden we don't have enough money to finish tracks because we have a history in South Bossier. We got some lights in a grass field and we're on 39 acres. So I just wanna make sure that we're not overspending the projects that we already have approved. Would it not be wiser to get the numbers from those projects and then we can quickly add another project to that to use the rest of the money at some point? And hopefully in the near future, like in the fall.
I don't disagree with that, but at this point, the numbers I have are just estimates.
And there's just a better reason to do it.
To speak to that, I think those tracks, the time frame of those tracks being done, if we were to do that, would take us greatly past when COPE would have the need for those 120 students that are coming in to utilize that for PE. So that's, when those new school lines are drawn next year, I think that's the
Well,
sole
the
reason.
track will be done this
Tracks will
fall.
be done this fall, right, Mr. Norwood? Isn't that the plan?
That's the
That
plan.
was the last word from the police jury, is they were gonna try to work them in for this fall.
So we'd have ample enough time to have the tracks done, figure out what the balance is, and if there's leftovers, to find out what the project costs are to do a COPE. And I don't disagree with the COPE project. I wanna make sure we get the projects, cause it's just an estimate, not to send something to be done and then all of a sudden say, well, we can only do 6.5 lanes of the Parkway track.
The estimate then on the Plain Dealing, what was the difference in the estimate on the asphalt and Plain Dealing as to where the project came in? Would it come way under on the asphalt overlay in Plain Dealing?
I don't have those numbers with me. I can forward it to you later.
Okay, thank you.
And I hope they are over. We got a history of not quite going over, so I would just like to get our project done and then allocate the money that's left after those projects. At least if they tell us the number, we'll know exactly what number we got to work with.
So,
And
Mr.
then do
Bullard, will you amend your motion to talk about the timeline of after that you authorize the superintendent following the tracks being completed?
Yes, ma'am, I will make the amendment that, funded by the, excess funding available
Beating a dead horse.
through our previously existing cooperative agreement, tied to the, tracks.
So
After that,
just to understand, the excess would go to COPE first, is that the motion as I understand it?
no, I don't think it's dedicated to COPE, but I
That
think
project.
we want the tracks to be done first, and then before we commit to doing any other projects? Is that, Mr. Bullard?
Yes, sir, that sounds good to me, sir.
Second.
If that's acceptable.
Ms. Carey, did you get that? That
That's,
motion? Okay. So I have a motion by Mr. Bullard. I have a second by Mr. Backhouse. Committee, please vote. All in favor?
What are we, okay.
I don't understand the motion.
Motion passes as read by Mr. Bullard there. It was unanimous.
Mr. Newman, can I get some clarification on what the motion was and what
Yes.
we just passed, please?
So I believe the motion was to,
Can I read it back to you?
yeah, I think Mr. Norwood's got it. The tracks will be done, and then after the tracks are done, the excess funds will be evaluated to go towards the court at Cope after the 2 tracks are completed.
So just so I understand, tracks are done. If there's an excess, Cope's getting their overlay.
I don't think it was specified to Cope, but that is the idea. I don't know if it was specified to Cope. Did
Can we amend it
specify?
to specify
Let
that
me
to
read it
Cope?
to you.
Let's see what Mr. Norwood has. We
Thank
might just
you
have to
very
start
much.
from
It's
scratch.
on-
Be wonderful.
It's on page 2, and I'm gonna give you the additional language that Mr. Bullard. The committee recommends the Bossier Parish School Board authorize the superintendent to act on his behalf to enter into a local services agreement with the Bossier Parish Police Jury, execute documents and take action related to an asphalt overlay at the outdoor court at Cope Middle School, funded by the 2012 Bond Construction Fund, excess funds from the local services agreement with the Bossier Parish Police Jury, and to be completed after the track overlays.
I'm in favor.
Good? Everybody good?
May I get one quick question? The track overlays, will all the tracks be the same?
No.
No.
At all the high schools? No, they will not, because we have some that are competition tracks, and we have some that are not. And there are 3 competition tracks, if I'm not mistaken, and 3 non-competition tracks in the parish.
Okay,
4? 4, I'm
So
sorry.
the 3 or 4 competition will be the same, and the non will be the same?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Did I get that right? Did I get that right? How about that? We got Benton Airlines.
So your motion's what he just said.
All right. I think we're good on that, right?
So did we vote on that? Or
We already did.
not? Okay, we're good. All right, praise Jesus.
All right, agenda item number 5, 2012 bond construction update, program manager, SGB Yates, joint venture, Mr. Clarence Babineau. Sir,
Good
the
afternoon,
floor is
everyone.
yours.
First slide, please, Mr. Norwood. I think this is going to answer some of your questions. Next slide. There we go. This is a slide we've been providing for you every couple months when we give our reports. This first top of the slide, these are projects that are complete and funds remaining. A correction on plain dealing, since I gave Mr. Norwood that $9,000 number, this has been slightly adjusted. This is the current balance. That's a positive on plain dealing, all right? So among completed projects, you've got about $314,000.
Is the will increase 24,000 on Halton Middle, is that new?
This number right here, this has been the number for a while. This is the negotiated number for the mold issue we had in the band room.
Okay.
The check has not yet come from the contractor. Apparently the 2 attorneys are still working some language out, last I heard. I'd asked for an update. So what I'm telling you is that number is going to increase to 2.
So the 220 does not include the 24,000 that we're
Correct.
getting, okay, all right,
So
thank you.
all these numbers, that number goes up about 24,000.
Okay,
Okay.
so we could be looking at about 340.
Correct.
Okay.
That's
So
Yeah, the 24,000, everyone, is extra based on the mold issue. That would be basically a service refund coming
Yeah, you
back
can call
from
it that.
the contract.
Reimbursement for some of the cost, actually. Yeah, okay, very good. And then down to the land sales, those 2 parcels have been sold. Those amounts are actually in the general fund specifically. They're not actually in the bond fund as far as the ledger goes. So, but with those and this amount, this is what you're sitting at right now, just over $1.2 million.
So we moved $900,000 to the general fund from the bond fund?
And that's just where they're earmarked right now. That's all. I'm just reporting what's provided to us. All right.
hold on a second here. Do you have a question, Mr. Buller?
I think I'd prefer for those funds to be back in the bond fund account.
Okay. You have a question, Mr. Bamber? Was there a specific reason why it was moved there, or was that where it was taken into based on the sale and we just haven't taken it from there to the bond? Okay, okay. So that's where it was initially taken in?
Yes, I
Okay,
understand
okay.
completely. I just think in light of, just to keep everything nice and clear and, separated.
Okay.
Let's slide it back to the bond. Again, I'm not gonna belabor that conversation. We don't know what we're facing. We got a couple of pretty major projects still out there.
Okay.
So those dollars may be a big help to us.
Okay. And then you still have several tracks for sale. These are the appraised values. You've got another 1.3 million in property for sale with those appraised values. So if those properties sell for those appraised values, total with what you have in hand, you'll be right at $2.5 million.
Mr. Norwood, do we have any activity updates on these tracts of land? Do we have any bids at all on these three pieces?
No, we've had some mild interest in Benton Road and in Teal Road. We actually had an offer of cost that was attractive because of zoning restrictions. Biggest problem with Benton Road is DOT access, because, new policies about requiring service roads and so forth. Teal Road is really just a very odd piece of property.
Mr. Bullard?
Just a quick question. Is DOTD still saying we have to access that property off Mansfield? That little residential, it's a path, it's not even a full-blown road. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, sir.
I'm sorry, I had my mic turned off earlier. That's Britton Road. It is
Yes.
substandard. It's really not 2 lanes wide, and
No.
you are correct. That was their last determination. They haven't changed that. I don't believe that's technically correct because this property's already been subdivided at one point. We own several separate lots there, but that was the interpretation that we got from DOTD at the time that we were looking at developing it for a school. I don't have any new interpretations, frankly, because I thought they'd be adversarial. But what we've done on this property, just to remind you, it was a total of about 32 acres, and we're reserving the back half for a potential future elementary school site. We could consider selling the entire parcel, or we could consider trying to figure out what they want with the transportation access and rearranging what we market as the half that we're selling, which is about 17 acres. We have options there, but we haven't really pursued changing the way it was been presented, which was just basically the front half.
What would be the cost associated with pushing forward on trying to establish an access point, which would make our property much more marketable if we could go in, but would it be cost prohibitive for us to pursue that?
That's an interesting question. We would be getting into a matter of being a developer if we do that. It certainly is doable for us to go ahead and build an access road or something like that, but we've already reserved that footprint on the north side of the front parcel going into the back, so we would have that alternate access, even though we were told that our primary access would need to be off the back, off Britton Road. We still reserved a strip of right-of-way, so we could still make that access to Benton Road happen. But you're talking about, in today's numbers, I think the last time we built the road outright separately was between $200 and $400 a linear foot, so it's quite a quite a big expense to bring it up to pair standards.
Now, when
I'm-
you're saying
I'm
a road,
sorry,
you're saying concrete or asphalt or dirt and gray rock?
Either one, it would have to be concrete or asphalt.
Why would it have to be?
For it to be considered a parish standard road, it would have to be.
I'm sorry, maybe I didn't make myself clear. In my mind, I'm thinking all we're doing is we are getting the necessary approvals. And if need be, we drop a culvert and a couple of loads of dirt, and we establish that point of ingress and egress. All we're doing is saying, hey, it's here, it's available with this property sale. That would have to, I would think, enhance it, and then we could leave to the purchaser, subsequent developer, the cost of installing concrete, asphalt, whatever. I'm thinking, what would it take just to go through the permitting process?
Well, I can
Or is
tell
that
you-
even feasible? I may be asking something that you just don't do. I don't know.
Actually, my previous experience with our own school sites is that what you're referring to is a driveway permit. And in the last couple of projects we've done, for example, Halton Middle School on 3227, we submitted for a driveway permit, which is just what you said, dropping a culvert for construction. And what was returned was essentially a compliance order to commit us to promise that the improvements would be made at our expense before the land could be utilized. And I think honestly that's a bit much. I don't think we would want to do that. I think that we would be better to consider an alternate configuration of the property to make it more sellable, and to evaluate whether we really need it as a future elementary school site. Maybe with our demographer now that some things are changing with our zoning, but it was simply, keeping that site was simply a safety net in case we had the kind of growth at Kingston and Apollo that we couldn't accommodate any other way than to build a new school. But as you know, there's no funding for a new school right now. That would be sometime in the future.
Has anyone researched what size right-of-way Britton Road is? It appears to me it's minimal, if anything.
I don't think I have that. It's probably 50 or 60 feet, and that's assuming that there's actually a dedication on paper. Some roads like that, it's a tacit dedication where it's agreed it's a public road and someone maintains it without there being a document to that effect.
That has concerned me from the get-go, that if you drive that road, some of those properties they're right there on the road. Some of the improvements, I guess would be a better way of putting it. It could be a significant issue if we were to try to expand it. So,
Perhaps what would be in order would be to visit with our real estate agent about that. And let them, first of all, brainstorm it and see what ideas they may have to make the properties more marketable, and then let them meet with the committee and make some suggestions on what options we might have there.
yeah, I think if we can show good access, I've got to think, I don't know if Shane, you deal with this all the time, I've got to think that would enhance the marketability of the property.
All right, Mr. Norwood, action item number 3, is at the real estate, and see what we can do about getting this rolling.
I have a quick question, and it'll be very quick. I'm the new guy. Is Kerry Martin not on this list for sale? Is it not a facility that is currently for sale? Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one question on property? We no longer have property. I mean, it's not being made anymore. And it's only going up. Why are we wanting to sell what we have at this time? 5 years from now, we may need it, or it may double.
We initially, I don't know, about two years ago, I reached out to Mr. Norwood about any property that we had that we couldn't build a school on. You know, you need 30, 40 acres to build a school on. So if you've got 16 acres, what are we gonna do with it? And I don't think we're in the, at the time, and I still believe this, I don't think we're in the business of just collecting land for the heck of it. If we can't build a school on it, our thought was to sell it. And actually, our thought at the time was, how could I come up with money to help us get turf fields without using bond money? And at the time, that was, let's sell these properties that we're not going to build schools on and use that money to do something, to spend it. Yes, Mr. Ward.
Mr. Dean, at the inception of the bond program in 2010, we were charged with finding land for future school sites. And we acquired a number of sites, including Turtle Creek, Capeless-Ligo Road, and 4900 Benton Road, with the idea that they would be for future school sites for the very reason you discussed, that they're not making land anymore. And so the sooner we acquire it, the better off we'll be, not only in cost, but in the quality of the land. So with the exception of 4900 Benton Road, these other properties that we're marketing is excess property from projects that have already been built. So it's left over. Okay, this is the exception, but the reason that this one didn't fly is we had our demographer do some studies with respect to the consent decree on where was the best place to build schools, and the numbers turned out better on Kingston, so that's where we are. Also, it was kind of splitting a zone, and so it didn't really work for North Bossier or for Benton to carve a zone out at that time. So it's a good piece of property, but the location of it was for a potential middle school.
And which property was that?
4900 Benton Road, just north of Vanceville. Okay, it's a hayfield.
Okay, that's the 16 acres, 16.1.
Yeah, and the total acreage is about 32 acres there. So the idea was, we know we will not need a middle school there, so we'll reserve enough for potential elementary and sell the rest.
Well, I'm just knowing you go to buy school property, you have to have a large tract, and people know it's a school, so they're gonna go up on the price.
Well, by law, we can't pay more than the appraised value.
I didn't realize it.
So that's why it took us so long to get rid of this.
Mr. Norwood, I have a question, something that was just reminded to me. Did we ever remove this sign that said future home of Turtle Creek Elementary from that property?
No, sir, it's still there, and it's still in good enough shape that we get phone calls about it.
I thought I discussed that with somebody about getting that removed. Can we get that removed, please?
Mr. Newman would like that in his backyard as soon as possible, please.
I can look into that. The company that we purchased the property from has since, the property's been sold and is owned by someone else, and so I think I have two different sets of entities. I have the original owners by name, and then the successor that owns the adjacent property that I would need to check with and see, just to be sure that we don't have any long-term commitment. We have a 10-year reversion clause on that property.
I just want the sign removed, because I'm also don't like getting phone calls.
Well, the sign, what I'm saying to you is the sign was a part of the original agreement, and I'll just have to pull that document and get some legal advice on that if we can pull the sign.
The sign was a part of the original agreement.
So part of the original purchase agreement was to leave a sign there for 10 years advertising that?
Yes, it was to be advertised that it would be used as a school, site in the future.
When did we purchase it? 2012?
2012, yes, I believe so. 2012, 2014 timeframe.
See if we can get rid of the sign. Okay. Moving on.
Any more questions on this slide? Next slide, please. All right, the overall synopsis for our 2012 bond funds, we've sold $185 million to date. There's another 25 to sell. Current inflation on projects to come for the next $25 million is about $1 million a year, or 4%. I know your bond counsel is monitoring conditions. Just talking to Mr. Rougeau, he's been in recent contact with him to advise on future bonds if they don't have any information as to amounts or timing yet. But that is something they monitor on a fairly constant basis. And once we finish, all the bills are paid on all the current construction projects, we're going to have about $1.2 to $1.3 million out of that 185 that's been sold. All right. And then the status of the last four wing projects. The Benton Middle Ring Road, that's still technically the approved project. Nothing has happened. The board's taken no action on that. The Parkway Wing, again, the board's taken no action on that project. The Houghton High Wing and the Cope Middle Wing, I've got the more detailed information on the following slides. And just as a reminder, we're moving forward with the Houghton and Cope projects for plans to be submitted by December. And part of the reason is, of course, the reason to build those wings, but the building code is going to change. Starting January 1st of next year, schools and other types of buildings will be required to have storm shelters. As you know, we've been having that conversation for about 2.5, 3 years now. All right. Any questions on this slide? No.
Eric.
Next slide, please.
Eric,
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry,
Um,
Ms. Smith?
just by our next building and grounds, could we kind of have a status on possibly moving forward with the wing at, Benton Middle? I think that's kind of been decided that we were in need of that more
A
than the
wing or ring road?
A wing. The
A
wing
wing?
versus the ring road. We had talked about that at a couple of building and grounds in the past.
Mr. Norwood, do you want to bring us some information back on that?
We had talked about making that decision
Yes,
before December.
I think we have some preliminary numbers on that. We presented that earlier this year, like in the March timeframe. That was one of 4 projects that we presented to the committee, but we only went forward with Houghton and Cope.
And
Bring-
removing those temporary buildings.
Bring us some information on that, if you would, please.
Any more questions on this slide? All right, next slide, please. Okay, on the Houghton Wing, the architect submitted the design development drawings. That's about roughly the halfway point. Overall, what he submitted are 75% complete construction documents for the architectural, and the consulting engineers about 40%. We're in the process of reviewing those right now for him. He reports he's still on schedule to submit those in December as the final plans. As long as they're in the Code Authority's office before the end of the year, we'll be in good shape. And I think he's probably even a little bit ahead of schedule right now, so I think we're in good shape on that project. And we've got a meeting scheduled Thursday afternoon with the school administration to do another update and review with them the plans as they stand right now. So we'll get some feedback, make sure there's no last-minute tweaks, which is something we typically do with the school administrators.
And Mr. Babineau, what is our best guess estimate for this project at Houghton High School?
Project cost or construction cost?
Total cost.
Total. You've got a budget of right at $16,096,000. And I've got a slide, I'll show you that number in just a moment.
Mr. Bullard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Babineau, what's the time schedule on this right now? When do you think it'll be ready to let for bid?
Great question.
And then from that, we'll have an approximate ground break.
Right. What the board has
First,
authorized right now is just for us to complete plans and submit them for plan review. We've not been authorized to go out for bids. We could conceivably, if with the board action, go and submit them, and then as soon as we get approvals, go out for bids immediately, which would be early part of next year. And then you can start construction probably late in the first quarter.
And we're going to need to sell those remaining bonds
You will.
to facilitate the next steps, because we have to have cash in hand in effect.
You'll need cash once construction starts. You've got enough cash to fund all the plans. We've got that covered, all right? But again, you've gone back to the previous slide. You've got about $1.2 million, $1.3 million remaining. That's not enough to fund a $16 million construction project. So yes, you would need to look at selling your bonds as a whole protocol, as you know, with working with your bond counsel and the timing. Probably, if you are serious about that, I would want to have a conversation with them sooner than later.
Mr. Norwood, action item. Please get us a bond sale update and prospectus about what we might be looking at. Mr. Bullard, is that?
I think so, and some indication of what the trend is on bond pricing right now.
Bond market looks like right now?
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you, it's a little fickle, I think, and, but, Jared can give us a pretty good indicator
Yeah,
with
he's
given
always-
his experience.
He's always been right to us, so if we could get
Yeah.
some information and update from him or through him on what he,
I'll get with Mr. Russo about that, yes.
I'll be
his
honest with you,
recommendation.
if we, you know, if Mr. Osborne said this would be an appropriate time to move forward, I'm inclined to, okay,
Get 'em
let's
all
pull the trigger. Let's put that part of this puzzle to
done.
rest. And now we're dealing with absolutes. We know exactly what, other than the bidding. And we can move forward,
Mr. Norwood will get us some information on that.
get this thing going.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you,
Mr. Bowman?
Yes, sir. Next slide, please. Received this recently from your demographer. This is some of the enrollment projections for Houghton High, since we're talking about the Houghton project. This is the current year right here. Your functional capacity with current buildings, with and without T buildings, between 1575 and 1512. Of course, you know we're building the wing in part to replace some old antiquated buildings, and also get rid of some T buildings in that project. So this is just for general purposes, general information. All right? Any questions on enrollment? Next slide, please. Just a quick refresher, this is the site plan. The current auditorium sits right here. That's what's going to be demolished initially to make room for the new wing, which will sit right here in front, with the new admin wing over to the west side, which is on the corner of the property, Hazel, and then McKinley right over here. So it's a good location. That's just, again, building one to be demolished. This is the H building, which we'd like to get demolished at some point. And then at some point in the future, long-range plan is to replace the E building with another wing as need and funds are available. All right, any questions? Next slide, please. Floor plan, this is the administrative building. Again, this is what we're meeting on Thursday with the school administration. This wing is about 9,800 square feet, this component of it. And this is in sizes of the rooms and general layout is virtually identical to New Benton High School. The arrangement of some of the components is a little bit different, but basically room for room and general layout, it's near virtual identical to Benton High. All right? Any questions on that? Next slide, please. This is the classroom wing, 30 rooms total, 22 standard classrooms, 6 business classrooms, which are on the ground floor right here, and then 2 special ed classrooms, which are on the second floor, and then 22 standard classrooms with 3 stairwells. Any questions? All right. Next slide, please. Quick update on the estimate. I mentioned to you the budget is $16,096,000. That's that number right here. These are our projected costs for this year. I like Mr. Bullard's question because at some point in 2020, those numbers are going to start wanting to tweak up against our budget. So the sooner we get this thing under construction, the better off we're going to be budget-wise, given inflation and all. So the timing of the question was very good, and I appreciate that. Any questions on the estimate? Next slide, please. Updating Cope Middle. Design development drawings from the architect are due in my office next week. We'll start that review. He is also on schedule to submit final plans for review in December, just like for Houghton. And once we get those, we'll again sit down with Ms. Grooms and review the design, which we've had a couple of meetings with her already, but we'll have a little more detail to sit down with her and have some conversation. All right? Any question on that slide? Next slide. A couple of quick pictures on the new secure entrance. I know not everyone's probably had a chance to go there. Once you walk in the new gates, this is what you see upon arrival. These doors go into the commons. These over here go into the new office. This is a very, very similar concept to what was being discussed a moment ago at the old Benton High School. This is a view of the new secure entrance if you're inside of the waiting room looking out. Any questions?
I have a question, and Stacy, you'll probably be able to answer this a little bit better, but as I stated earlier, I went and visited the school, and in that common area, I mean, there's no air flow. And like I was in my sports coat and I was sweating like crazy after about 5 minutes. But those kids, you start getting the kids in there. So I have a concern about that, as well as the big columns. I watched a kid run and jump on top of the brick column that's kind of in the middle of the, and I heard we were gonna be removing those. But I watched a student actually literally run and jump, and I was like, man, if he falls. So what are some thoughts or future ideas on removing those, and then figuring out an airflow for that area? Okay.
I've got some information coming in.
Okay.
Good question, good timing. All right. Next slide, please. We'll get there in just a moment. This is the same enrollment slide for COPE 2019. You're looking at 857, and these are the numbers with and without T buildings, which are largely going to be very similar to with the new wing, because when the new wing gets built, the T buildings are going away. It's going to be sort of a one-for-one replacement. Okay. All right. Any questions on the enrollment?
So with the new wing, we'll be at 903 functional capacity.
Roughly, yeah. Now, there's a caveat, and I'll show you, in the next slide, I'll show you what I'm talking about.
All right.
Next slide, please, Mr. Norwood. All right. The new wing has a new band room. The old band room will be used for other educational purposes, and then it includes bathrooms and then 2 classrooms, and then an alternate for 2 more. You know, there's been some change in the attendance zone, and I've had some questions in my mind. What's that do to the attendance numbers? And that's why I asked Mr. Your demographer for that information on those numbers. So once we get bids, when we get the plans will include an option for 2 classrooms. We did the exact same thing when we bid Sun City last year. We had an option, elected to take it because the costs were good. We're going to have that same option right here on this project. All right, and I'll show you how the money works out on the next slide. All right, very good. All right, you've got a budget of $2,117,000. That's the balance after paying for the secure entrance, which was running around $86,000. The 2 wings with the 2 restrooms and the band room this year projected about $2,059,000, which is about $60,000, $70,000 on their budget. The option for 2 classrooms, we're estimating at about $675,000. That would put us over budget. However, we never know what's going to happen with the bid climate. We may have a lot of hungry contractors at some point in time. You never really know. But we're going to have plans, and we'll know bid day whether we can or can't. We'll come back to you with a recommendation with some options for that. To your question, Mr. Cheatham, we looked at actually enclosing the commons. That commons has a roof, but it is not an air-conditioned space. It's got gates on the front and then 2 sets on the side, so it's open air, in other words, all right? To enclose the gates, put storefront in lieu of the gates and air condition it, because it's a very large space, about 7,500 square feet, would be right at $400,000, okay? That would also put us over budget, but we might find some funds for it, depending on how much of a project, or how much of a priority that becomes come bid day. We think that's a little bit high, so Stacy and I were talking about some options, and that was 2B, and 2B was remove the benches, and then add some very, very large fans. You may have seen the fans in the dining commons at New Benton High School. They're about 10 feet diameter. The idea was to, and if you can't afford AC, and right now I don't really see how we can afford that if we also did 2 classrooms, but we might be able to get some money for some large fans, at least get some air circulating so you get some movement. Wouldn't be cool, but moving air will have a little bit of the same effect, or similar effect, if you will, to conditioned air. So that would be how we might consider addressing it. So if you're okay with that option, we'll go with that.
Mr. Bass?
I just want to make sure I understand too, there's already been one liability issue with those benches that are in that commons area, am I correct? All right, I just want to make sure that, that we understand there's already been an issue with those brick benches that are in the middle.
Yep. Are you suggesting that maybe that just become a priority and get done ASAP, or?
I'll leave that up to this committee, but I know as a grown man, it was enticing to me to see if I could jump over a bench. I'm guessing that a bunch of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders may have thought the same thing. So I know we've already had an issue with that in the past. So yeah, I'm with Mr. Cheatham. I've recently visited Cope Middle School, and I was in short sleeves, and it was a problem as far as ventilation in there. So I don't know that HVAC is anywhere close to being in our budget, but to remove those benches and some fans may be something that we really need to discuss.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions on the Cope estimate? All right, next slide. Quick updates on some other construction projects. This is Parkway High School. The concessions building is finally finished. The hired Tri-State Mobile to complete the punch list. That was what the contractor failed to do. So the board took action, and between Mr. Norwood and maintenance, got that taken care of by hiring this contractor. It'll be paid for out of the funds remaining out of that project. It's not any additional money. And then we've had a follow-up call recently with the surety. As you know, there are a number of liens that have been filed. There are still funds available within that project because we've held back quite a bit of money from the contractor that will satisfy those liens. The surety is double-checking its own math and calling each of the lien holders to verify what they're actually owed. They will supply a list of what's owed, and those checks will be cut, and that will settle that project. All right? Any questions on
this
Parkway?
amount was deducted from the contract. I guess I came in late on this one or something, or did we go against the performance bond on this, or what, where?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Oh, as far as Tri-State Mobile, did this do we hold that back from the contractor's pay, or do we
Yes.
go against
That
the performance
29,000
bond?
is, we had about 117,000 held back because there was a pretty long punch list, and then we had all these liens piling up, so we just held that money until it could get settled. So it's being paid for out of the original budget. Okay. Any other questions? All right, next slide, please. Of course, you know, Sun City has been finished. The grass caught, the contractor put out some temporary irrigation. I think they're going to leave it down for a little bit longer to make sure things don't die. But the majority of the punch list is complete. He's got 45 days, of course, by law to complete the punch list. That term ends next week. Upon that time, we'll do a final inspection, make sure there are no outstanding items, and then he'll get his final payment, and that'll be settled in that project.
Mr. Babineau,
Yes, sir.
where do we stand on those wonderful T buildings being gone from there?
I'm going to have to defer to someone who can answer that question.
Well, first of all, they've already been declared surplus, as you know. They've been inventoried and photographed, and the actual disposition of those will be through purchasing. But we had to report those to the Justice Department in our consent decree, our consent order, and they had some follow-up questions last week, which we answered, and so we're still waiting on their response, but we feel that it will be favorable to allow these two buildings to go away. And the idea is to market them essentially for anyone who's interested in either paying, us paying them to remove them, or them paying us for a building, whatever is the most expedient way to make them go away. But there is not a timeline yet, but that's the plan.
So we're waiting on the DOJ to tell us we can get rid of T buildings that we built a permanent building to replace.
Yes, sir.
Makes perfect sense.
That was a part of the consent order from last August.
Mr. Norwood, and thank you for that update. I guess my concern, I wouldn't give you $1 for those buildings, and I don't think anybody's gonna come pay what it takes to transport them somewhere else. So if no one will buy them or get them for the scrap metal or whatever the case may be, what's our plan B?
They would be demoed at cost for demo. There are people.
Do you
in
think
town
somebody
that do
will
that.
buy them?
There are some people that are interested. The problem is the cost of moving. They would have to have an in. I talked to one of the local house movers, and I have a list of people who not only will move for a fee, but also who will acquire and move for their own purposes, for flipping and improvement. So there is actually a small market for that.
So are we advertising these with a specific sale price, or are we just open to all bids?
I think it would be, Ms. Douglas, more of a proposal type of situation. Would you agree? Not a set price, but what did you envision with that?
I think that we would offer them for, well, we have to sell them at fair market value. So we won't open them with like a reserved price. We'll just take whatever highest bid comes in at.
So a 40-year-old T building in disrepair goes for $5 plus whatever
If it
you...
goes for $5, we will sell it for $5 on the condition that they secure permits to move it off of our property. We won't do, none of that will be considered
Yeah.
on our end.
They could say, hey, we'll move it, and that is our purchase price.
Yes, if they want to buy it for $5, then we will sell it for $5 on the condition they figure out how to get it off of our property.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that's like that's what y'all get from us, that we don't necessarily need profit from this
No.
other than them gone at somebody else's expense.
Correct. So, but then on the flip side, if nobody wants to purchase it, then you tell us how much you will charge us to take it off of our hands, or to demo it. So we've got two sides there. You can buy one if you want to move it, or we will pay you to demolish it. So that's kind of how we're going to structure it.
Thank you. Mr. Cheatham?
The second comment I have on this Sun City deal is I think, and I think Stacy's team probably handled this, but if you drive by there, the old dugouts from Parkway's old football stadium are now gone, and it looks really, really nice there. What did I say?
Baseball has dugouts.
Okay, yeah, the dugouts are gone. Looks very nice, and I appreciate y'all getting that taken care of. Several comments. My son practices football on this little field, and people were, first of all, they were wondering where'd the shade go, because they used to sit in the dugout and watch their kids practice, but once it was gone, that they really think that looks a lot nicer, so thank y'all for doing that.
Has the last time I was, the fence been,
Fence hasn't been finished yet.
what's the ETA on that? Anybody? You can yell from your chair. Okay.
Any other questions on Sun City? All right, thank you. Next slide, please. All right, Bossier High. The stadium improvements were officially substantially completed today, as a matter of fact. Just a quick synopsis. This is the interior of the new ticket booth. This is the new handicap accessible restroom on the visitor side. This is the skirting. Now, it has not been painted. This is a slide from last week. But this is the steel skirting on both sides of the stadium. This is the handicap seating with companion seating in the stadium. And then there are 4 handicap accessible parking spots just to the immediate east side of the entry to the stadium itself. So so that wraps up that. The engineer put out the substantial completion certificate along with a small punch list. He'll get filed the contract will have 45 days to finish, and then he'll get the rest of his payments. So that's worked out pretty well. I've enjoyed working with that contractor. It's Thrash Construction. And the last item up here is Mr. Norwood and I met with the engineer today to look at the options for correcting the drainage issues on the turf field. We'll be coming back to you with more information as that develops. All right.
Mr. Downey?
Mr. Babineau,
Yes, sir.
Or Mr. Norwood, we originally had a discussion about the original specifications for that field and not wanting to vary from that for fear of us being responsible for any addition or upgrade. And so is it my understanding or our understanding that we have gotten back to the original specifications as being an option for discussion or negotiate? Where are we at on that?
Well, we had to request that additional information about the scope, and we've had our engineer confirm what that scope would be, and so we're going to resubmit that to the contractor again for correction. And yes, I shared that information with our team today by phone or in person, that that's how we want to do it, that we want to have it restored to spec.
Any other questions on Bossier High? All right. Next slide, please.
I want to throw something out there. I do have a thing. The field, the drainage issue is the crown, right? There's no crown. It's completely flat. Is that my understanding?
In spots. Yeah.
Like swag down.
You got about 6 little bird baths about that deep.
I'll reserve my comments for later.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. All right. We'll finish up with Benton High today. Contractor is still working on the interior punch list. The competition gym, per his schedule, is to be completed by the 20th. That's next week. This is a fairly recent slide of the competition gym. The floor is completely down. The bleacher frames, you can't quite see it. The slide's a little bit dark, but you can see the bleacher frames are actually in on all 3 sides. He's got the floor finished under the bleachers, and now he's got to finish and come back with, once all this all the box removed, he's got to come back and finish the floor for that gym. The auxiliary gym is completed except for the chair backs. The chair backs, the company order was placed months ago, and the company wasn't able to fulfill it, so they had to go to another supplier. They're coming from overseas. Last I heard, they were actually in shipment, and once they arrived at the Port of Los Angeles, they would get shipped here quickly, and then the contractor would install them ASAP. So we're looking at late September, early October. So hopefully next 2 to 3 weeks, that will be 100% finished. As you know, we've talked a little bit about the VCT issue. There's some slight, very, very slight ridges about the thickness of a piece of paper in the tiles that came from the factory. They weren't visible until the wax went down. The manufacturer sent folks out and done some reporting. We haven't been satisfied with that report. And so they've agreed to fund some testing by an independent lab. A representative of that lab came in last week, and we're waiting for a report from them to see what their recommendations are, what they think the causes are, and the recommendations. So we're still holding the cost of that item until that's resolved, until we're satisfied with that.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Tell me specifically what the substantial completion is of the competition gym by 9/20. Like, I want to know details like, can they play basketball in there? Can they use the locker rooms? Can they use the bleachers? I don't want to just see substantial completion. I want to know what is able to be done in that
Right.
gym by 9/20.
Right. Substantial completion is the legal term. It can be used for the intended purpose. It may not be 100%. There might be some punch list items, but substantial completion is finished to where you can use it. That's the general. That's a term that comes out of our contracts. Okay. The question has been, in fact, it came last week that there's an event that's going to be going. I think it's homecoming or dance right after the 20th. So the principal was insisting it be finished. So we have a meeting with them tomorrow morning. I'll have more update as to their progress. But it's supposed to be finished, meaning the floor is finished, the striping's down. The locker rooms are already usable. It's just the floor was the last part of that component.
Because I guess here's where I'm coming from on that. Per the general contractor labeling it substantially completed, he hits his deadline, therefore he's not penalized financially. His idea, or someone's idea rather, I don't want to be specific, but
Right.
someone's idea of substantial completion just to hit a deadline so there's no financial responsibility versus actual physical substantial completion. Do you understand where I'm coming from
I
with that?
understand exactly where you're coming from. The other side of that coin is his 45-day lien period is going to run out about next week sometime. So if something isn't complete, then penalties may actually apply, depending on the conditions. So we've had some conversation with the architect about that and how that all came about, and we'll be having some more conversations tomorrow about that as well.
So where is this project as compared to those deadlines that we set forth in the beginning?
You've got an occupancy permit from the code officials, and so that basically settled the initial matter of the overall project being complete and occupiable. The exceptions were the gyms and then the sports fields, which are still underway, but I've got a little bit more information on the sports fields coming up. So the auxiliary gym is usable because the floor is finished. But you can't use the bleachers yet because the chair backs were in back order because the factory that originally had it couldn't supply it, they had to go to another supplier. So that's coming in. In the case of the competition gym, they were working on the bleachers and they should be finished. I'll know a little bit more better tomorrow how far along they actually are, but they're supposed to be finished again by the 20th or 23rd at the very latest. That includes the floor, meaning the floor has been sanded, the floor has been varnished, and the striping is down, and then it's fully usable, etc. Okay, 100% done. Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
I have a question.
Mr.
So,
Bass?
competition gym,
Right.
since the Benton Tigers have scheduled the Parkway Panthers for homecoming, it will be ready for those students to hold a pep rally in there to be ready for that game?
The principal made the contractor aware of that date, and they're working to do that. So I will know more how much their progress. I haven't been there this week, so I'll know more tomorrow morning when I'm there.
And Mr. Babineau, who do you want to win that game of Benton against Parkway?
I'm going to stay neutral on that one.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I had that on record.
So we're beyond the point of financial responsibility for any more delays?
Not
Yes or no?
necessarily. Not necessarily. If the possibility exists, and there's a lot of whys and wherefores in the contract language, but the possibility exists for anything that's not finished by the end of the 45-day lien period, then LDs can be assessed. The question is, it's not the entire project, it's a portion of the project, and then what would be a fair value. So that would require some conversation, but to answer your question, that's not completely off the table.
There's no bigger motivator than money,
Agreed?
regardless of circumstances.
Yeah.
All right.
I got 2 more slides. All right. This is some photographs of the track. The track was put down, the asphalt was put down a couple of weeks ago. It's got to go through a minimum 21-day cure period. After it was put down, we had a planeness test done, which is to say, is it flat enough? Does it have the right slope? And they check it about every 10 feet around the entire perimeter of the track. And there's some spots that were high and spots that were low. You see these pieces of paint on the ground right here, and over here. They've ground a couple of high spots. They've got to go back and correct all these. Hellas is putting the topping down. There's a half-inch topping that goes on top of this, but it's got to meet basic requirements first. And so the contractor has to finish fixing that before Hellas will accept it to put their topping down. So that test indicated where all the little anomalies are that have to be modified. So we're talking about a quarter-inch here, maybe a half-inch there, some high, some low, but they've got to get it flat enough in order to make it usable to meet the specifications. So that was from a few days ago. I'm going to see tomorrow how much progress they've made. All right, okay. The sod is pretty well rooted on the practice field, which is right here. There are some issues that I've walked the field, and we've told the contractor he's got to repair. There's a couple of round spots, not really large, but it's got a size of a small desk, got to be replaced in 2 or 3 locations. Biggest problem he has is there's some divots where the sod went down. It's not quite tight enough. He's got to come back and top dress the field, and he's been told he's got to get that done as well. And so he's not yet done that as of these photographs, but I want to get an idea from him when that's going to happen. So
is it realistic that they'll use that practice field before the November?
That's a really good question. What I heard the principal tell me that the coach just preferred not to use it, even though the grass is rooted. It wasn't quite flat enough, and I understand and I agree with him. So I need an update from the contractor. How soon will that top dressing be completed so that it's usable as it's intended? And I'll know more after the meeting tomorrow.
See my previous comment about financial penalties for not getting stuff done on time when we need it.
There's been some internal conversation about what applies and when does it apply. So I think we're going to have some more conversation with the architect about, and the contractor. But look, there's a deadline, and so we're going to have some, I think, some come to Jesus meetings with them.
I mean, it's displacing so many people. I mean, it's
completely agree with you.
You know, to me, it's unnecessary.
Yeah, completely agree. All right, and the last slide. This is the progress on the press box. This is looking out toward the baseball and softball fields. These are the 2 dugouts. These are the outfield, I'm sorry, the post at the back. This is a slide of the sod on the soccer field. It went down, and as far as I'm concerned, it looks dead. And so I informed the contractor, and I informed the architect, and we're going to have some talks with them about that tomorrow. He said it was green when it went down, he being the contractor, and he just got it even though they were watering it. If it's not any improved, he's just going to have to take it up and redo it as far as I'm concerned. It went down. They had no trouble heat-wise when they put it down on the football field. It stayed green and was green, so I'm a little concerned about that. That's a pretty good bit, here about 3.5 acres of sod, so he may have the opportunity to redo that one as well.
Mr. Dean, you had a question?
Is that more cost to us if he has to replace it, or does he?
No, it will not be.
I'm sorry, sir.
Is that additional cost to the school?
No, sir. He has to make it good, period. And that's why we're still holding about $5.2 million of his dollars. All right. Any other questions?
So the light poles, the drill casing worked for the light poles?
That's been done. In fact, you can see one of the poles laying right here. They're about 75 feet long. All the foundations are in, they're just waiting for the concrete to cure. Those are pretty big foundations. I'm hoping, I'll know more tomorrow, but I'm hoping in another week or two they start wrecking those. All right. Now, just give you a little bit of heads up, because of the foundation issue with these, he'll be given an extension on those 2 fields because of soil conditions beyond his control. All right.
That is reasonable and
That's fair,
acceptable.
I think. I agree with you. And there are, while we have a lot of fields irrigated and a lot of landscaping irrigated, not everything is irrigated. And because of the heat, non-irrigated areas, we're going to give him an extension to wait until we're through with this high heat to put some of the other sod in outlying areas and some plants down so we don't lose those right away. So we'll get an extension on those, but other components he's not getting an extension on. All right? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are you gonna go over the cost, what we're at budget-wise with them?
Could you get your mic a little bit closer? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Are you gonna go over the cost and budget, where we are in our budget with Benton?
With Benton, your total project cost is right at 58.5 million, okay? The construction cost is standing at 47,290,000. That's the total cost. You've paid out about 42 million so far of the construction cost. We're holding the other 5.2 right now. Okay.
Are we going
Under
to come
budget.
in under or over
Every
budget?
project is under budget, including this one.
It's because we had 20% built in for overage.
I'm sorry, 20%.
I'm sorry.
I'm happy to get about 0.5%, so what's
So
the
we're
word?
gonna have money left over is what you're telling me,
Right now, we have a small surplus, yes.
Well,
It's a
let's-
fraction of a percentage point.
a fraction of a percentage.
They're all fractions of 1%, believe me. Any other questions? All right, thank you for your attention.
Is that the last slide?
Yes, sir.
Are you gonna can we get a copy of these? Can we get a copy of,
Sure.
I would like to have a copy.
You want to send it? You want to send it
I
out?
sent it to Jennifer already.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just email.
All right, thank you, Mr. Babineau.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Mr. Norwood, any comments wrapping up? Do you have your action items for our next meeting?
Yes, sir, I'll go over those with you when we set the agenda to be sure we've got them all in line. And some of those will involve finance, so I'll get with Mr. Rougeau about those.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Mr. Dean?
Before we leave, I just want, and it's a small item compared to what he's talking about, but the canopy at Plainview, where do we stand with that at this time?
I think they're getting us back some
Prices?
numbers on that, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, let me ask you, he said it was something like 27,000. There's a contractor in Plainview that builds metal buildings and sheds. Is it possible to ask him what he could charge on that, see if he could beat the price? Or
That's gonna fall with procurement and legal, because I don't know, and bid law, I don't know how we are able to handle that going directly to I'm gonna defer that to Mr. Norwood, Mr. Roget, and our lovely procurement manager, Ms. Douglas.
Mr. Dean, can you just have them contact one of us?
Yeah.
Give us their information?
Sure. I'll do that.
Yeah.
If he's interested in doing it.
Yeah.
Here,
All right.
before we close, I
Ms.
have-
Brotherton.
Yes, it's not, has anything to do with this, but on Thursday morning at 9:30, I have invited, Mr. Bass and Mr. Dean and Ms. Smith, Mr. Bachhess and I to tour Houghton High School. I know most of you have already toured it. They have not, so if you would like to come out, I'm just inviting you, if you would like to come out at 9:30 Thursday morning, we're just gonna tour the school and visit with, Mr. Haney. So, just an invitation. Thank you.
All right. And that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much.